I am aware that you think that within the Quran you have the means by which to refute the Islamic dilemma, and I'm showing you no, you're actually confirming the Islamic dilemma.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I've stumbled across this video where Sam Shamoun is going head-to-head with Dr. Khalil Andani on something called the Islamic Dilemma. And let me tell you, this gets intense. Sam is basically arguing that the Quran confirms the Bible but also contradicts it, which creates a massive logical problem for Islam. And Khalil is trying to defend against that by saying the Quran only confirms the original gospel taught by Jesus, not the New Testament we have today. The back and forth here is absolutely wild. And by the end, you're going to see Sam drop one of the most devastating comparisons I've ever heard in a debate like this. So make sure you watch until the end, and please comment down below where you're watching from. I really love to see people from all over the world connecting in here. All right, now, let's get into the video.
In your articulation Islamic dilemma, I don't know if you're aware that when you say the Quran contradicts the Bible and therefore can't be confirming it, that's part of our dilemma. That's actually part of the argument. So this is why when you're saying these statements that the Quran cannot be confirming everything that's with them because it contradicts it, this is what our argument is. It assumes that it's in agreement with those scriptures, but it contradicts them, and hence the Quran is not a revelation from God. Now, I don't know if you're arguing as an academic or you're arguing as a theologian, because when I heard your presentation with Paul Williams, you said you can approach the Quran from two perspectives. Either you can approach it academically, descriptively, and see what the Quran says, or you can approach it from a theological position. From what I heard in your presentation, there was a combination of both. You're assuming that the Quran is revelation, so that if the Quran contradicts the scriptures are wrong. But now, let us try to be neutral. Let us not approach it theologically, academically. So when it says, confirming all that is with them, you stated, well, that means would it confirm even the apocryphal gospels? Well, that's your dilemma. That's not my dilemma. That's the dilemma that you have to resolve, because there's nothing in the passages you cited, and I have a whole list of them and I can share my screen. And since you went to pre-modern tafsir, and part of your arguments is that you included Sunni tafsirs, I'm going to include them as well. So my question to you is, since the Quran says it confirms what is with them and doesn't qualify it, how do you know that the apocryphal gospels are not inspired? That's your burden. That's your dilemma. So how do you know they're not inspired?
You want me to answer?
Yes, I'm waiting for it. Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing is the Islamic dilemma is a dilemma. It's called the Islamic dilemma because it's an argument that Christians present to Muslims, and it actually assumes a Muslim belief in the Quran. So to answer the dilemma, I have to take a position as a Muslim, which I happen to be. But when we mince over what is the correct meaning of the Quran, because that's what the dilemma comes down to. The dilemma comes down to you guys interpret certain verses some way, I interpret verses another way. So I appeal to critical historical scholarship on the Quran because that is a good indicator of what the Quran means in its own context, just like we would do the same to critical historical scholarship on the Bible, right? So
yeah, I didn't want to cut you off. Yeah, so now you're now
that's
arguing
the first part of your question.
Yeah, but you're arguing theologically now, so you're going to come in as a Muslim. Because I was listening to your presentation, that's why. I'm going by what you said with Paul Williams. So now that you're answering it theologically, since you assume the Quran is revelation, and I assume it isn't, so now the argument of the Quran is to convince the Jews and Christians this prophet is a prophet in the line of the prophets that came before him, and what he has confirms what is with them, and that's one of the arguments he gives, that they should take what he has seriously because it comes from the same source. So now, since you're saying that if we take this, and by the way, I need to screen share. I don't know if, can we screen share? Because I want to show my.
We can definitely make that happen. So just start sharing your screen and I'll get it pulled up.
Yeah, if we can bring this up.
Okay, so right off the bat, Sam is doing something that needs to be highlighted here because this is where the entire Muslim apologetic framework starts to crack. He's not just debating scripture. He's exposing the method that Khalil is using to defend Islam, and that method is exactly what makes this whole thing fall apart. When Sam says this, and I want you to catch this, he says, I don't know if you're aware that when you say the Quran contradicts the Bible, and therefore can't be confirming it, that's part of our dilemma. That's actually part of the argument. What does that mean? It means Khalil just accidentally made the Christian case for them. He's sitting there trying to defend Islam by saying the Quran can't confirm everything in the Bible because it contradicts certain parts. But that contradiction is the problem. That's literally what Christians are pointing out. And here's where it gets even better. Sam catches Khalil switching gears. He asks, are you arguing as an academic or as a theologian? Because Sam heard Khalil's presentation with Paul Williams, where Khalil said you can approach the Quran two ways, academically or theologically. And what Sam is noticing is that Khalil keeps mixing them. When it's convenient, Khalil becomes the academic. When he's cornered, he becomes the theologian who assumes the Quran is already true. Sam says there was a combination of both. You're assuming that the Quran is revelation, so that if the Quran contradicts the scriptures are wrong, but now let us try to be neutral. Let us not approach it theologically, academically. That's the trap right there. If you start by assuming the Quran is true, then, of course, you're going to say the Bible is wrong wherever they conflict, but that's circular reasoning. You can't prove the Quran is true by assuming it's true. Now here's where Sam really corners him. He brings up the apocryphal Gospels. He says, since the Quran says it confirms what is with them and doesn't qualify it, how do you know that the apocryphal Gospels are not inspired? That's your burden. That's your dilemma. This is brilliant because the Quran says it confirms what the Christians and Jews have with them. It doesn't say some of what they have. It doesn't say only the authentic parts. It just says what is with them. So if the Christians in Arabia had apocryphal texts, heretical creeds, all kinds of different writings, does the Quran confirm all of that? And if not, how do you pick and choose? You see the problem. Khalil tries to respond by saying, when we mince over what is the correct meaning of the Quran, because that's what the dilemma comes down to. The dilemma comes down to you guys interpret certain verses some way, I interpret verses another way. But notice what he's doing. He's making it about interpretation. He's saying, well, we just read the verses differently. But Sam isn't letting him get away with that because the issue isn't just interpretation. The issue is that the Quran makes a claim, and that claim has consequences. If the Quran says it confirms what's with the Jews and Christians, then historically, what did they have? They had the New Testament. They had the Old Testament. And if the Quran confirms those, but those texts teach things Islam denies, like Jesus being the Son of God, then you've got a massive contradiction that no amount of creative interpretation can fix. This is the Islamic dilemma in action, and we're only 4.5 minutes in.
Can I scroll down, or does he have to?
No, you. Let me unshare. Hold on. There we go.
Yeah. So now, is there a way you can enlarge it or no? No. Okay. We can't hear you, Cameron.
Oh, sorry about that. I had my mic muted. You're going to have to scroll on your end. There you go.
Oh,
you have to zoom in.
All right. Okay. So you said confirm doesn't mean everything. Well, you have to first demonstrate that, not by going to a passage that says, well, see, in that same Quran, it then contradicts what is found in those scriptures. Well, are you admitting then that this statement is referring to the scriptures in the possession of the Jews and Christians, which would be the New Testament? But you're now assuming that it doesn't confirm all of it, but some of it? Because for you to go to chapter 2, verse 116 or 117, to show that it denies that Allah has a son, therefore, this cannot mean it confirms everything. So that implicitly affirms that the Quran is acknowledging the New Testament and the Old Testament, but not all of it. So earlier you said that the Quran does not at all acknowledge the New Testament. It's aware of it, but doesn't acknowledge it or even appeal to it. So what are you saying exactly here?
So I said earlier, and if you look at the graphic that I had posted earlier, right? So I said that what the Quran confirms in the case of Christianity is the
By the way, I
gospel
can
of.
pull that back up if you want to share. It's up to you if it'd be
It's okay.
easier or
So
helpful.
so Sam, if you recall, in one of my slides, I had a diagram, and I said what the Quran confirms is the gospel taught by Jesus. That's how it defines the gospel. It doesn't define the gospel as writings about Jesus, and it doesn't define the gospel as a 27 book New Testament canon. Do you agree?
Yeah, but I'm not referring to the gospel. That was part of your argument. And I agree with you that the
Yeah.
gospel that the Quran mentions is given to Jesus. But my argument goes beyond that. It doesn't
No,
just speak of the gospel of Jesus, right?
that's fine. That's fine. So just for starters, though, the definition of gospel in the Quran is the message of Jesus. It's not the New Testament.
Okay, so you
Do you
want me
agree?
to, I mean, I can address it, yeah, but see, that's not solely my argument. I
No,
agree.
I know it's not your sole argument, but that's a
Yeah, I know it's
premise for my answer.
revelation given to Jesus, but whatever that
Yeah.
revelation is, it
Yeah.
was there and it was accessible to the Christians per 547 other part, which we'll get into. But my
Okay.
argument
So,
was, what was the Quran confirming in the possession of the Jews and Christians? And it says that they're supposed to uphold not only the Torah and Gospel, all the revelation given to them. So this is what
yeah.
I'm trying to get at. What is that revelation in Arabia? What did the Christians have?
So within the Christian canon, within the New Testament, there is content in there that is extant revelation from what Jesus taught, from what the prophets taught.
How do you
That
know?
extant, how do I know what?
What is your criterion to determine that the statements in these books contain
Yeah.
that revelation? Aren't you begging the question because you assume the Quran is revelation and it's the
So
standard by which
assume,
you say, this is true, this is not?
okay, so the Islamic dilemma is called the Islamic dilemma because it is an internal critique brought by Christians against believing Muslims. The Islamic dilemma is not an academic argument. It is a polemical, religious, theological argument.
So, now Sam is pulling up his screen and he's about to systematically dismantle Khalil's position. And you can already see where this is going because Khalil is trying to dodge the central issue. Sam says, you have to first demonstrate that not by going to a passage that says, "We'll see." In that same Quran, it then contradicts what is found in those scriptures. Well, are you admitting then that this statement is referring to the scriptures in the possession of the Jews and Christians? This is key, because Khalil's entire strategy is to say the Quran only confirms the original gospel that Jesus taught, not the New Testament that Christians have today. But Sam is forcing him to admit that when the Quran says it confirms what is with them, it's talking about the scriptures they currently possess, not some hypothetical lost original. And then Sam hits him with this. So, earlier you said that the Quran does not at all acknowledge a New Testament. It's aware of it, but doesn't acknowledge it, or even appeal to it. So what are you saying exactly here? Khalil is caught between two positions. On one hand, he wants to say the Quran doesn't affirm the New Testament as a whole. But on the other hand, he has to admit the Quran is aware of what's in the New Testament and even references it. So, which is it? Does the Quran engage with the New Testament or not? Khalil tries to clarify by saying, I said, what the Quran confirms is the gospel taught by Jesus, that's how it defines the gospel. It doesn't define the gospel as writings about Jesus, and it doesn't define the gospel as a 27-book New Testament canon. And okay, I actually understand what he's trying to say here. He's making a distinction between the message Jesus preached versus the books written about Jesus. That's a fair distinction to make. The problem is that this doesn't solve the dilemma. It actually makes it worse. Because if the Quran is telling 7th century Christians to judge by the gospel that was revealed to Jesus, but that gospel is not the New Testament they have in their hands, then how are they supposed to know what the original gospel even was? They don't have time machines. They don't have modern textual criticism. All they have is the New Testament in front of them. So when the Quran says judge by what God revealed to you, what exactly are they supposed to judge by? And if their text is corrupted and unreliable, then why is the Quran telling them to use it as a standard? Sam drives this home when he says, what was the Quran confirming in the possession of the Jews and Christians? And it says that they're supposed to hold not only the Torah and Gospel, all the revelation given to them. It's not just the Torah and Gospel. The Quran says all the revelation given to them. So, again, historically, what did they have? They had the entire Old Testament. They had the entire New Testament. They had various other texts. And the Quran tells them to uphold all of that. But if you're a Muslim and you believe the Bible is corrupted, how do you reconcile that? You can't. That's the dilemma.
So a theological argument is brought by Christians to a believing Muslim. I'm a believing Muslim.
To show what?
Sorry?
To show what? To show that the claim of Muhammad that God sent him is false, that he's not a true prophet.
Yeah. So the Islamic dilemma presumes that the interlocutor already has an established belief in the Quran. And they're trying to lead them from an established belief in the Quran as revelation to a non-belief in the Quran and a belief in Christianity.
Sure.
That's the dilemma.
How do we know about
Okay.
it?
Right. So, therefore, whoever is answering the dilemma, in this case, it's me. Tomorrow, you might talk to somebody else. But today, it's me.
I like to
So,
talk
in answer, no, I enjoy talking to you too. So, as a Muslim,
Yeah.
I have at my disposal, right, all the internal resources of Islam to answer the dilemma. And to answer the dilemma, I don't have to go back and start from atheism. Of course, if you want me to do that, I can do that.
I know how you're trying to answer, but I'm critiquing what you think is an internal method that consistently refutes the Islamic dilemma. So we keep repeating the same thing.
No,
So what I want to try to advance the conversation. I am aware that you think that within the Quran you have the means by which to refute the Islamic dilemma, and I'm showing you no, you're actually confirming the Islamic dilemma. If you understand the point I'm making, and maybe it's my fault that I'm not as clear. So let me repeat what I'm saying here.
sure. Yeah.
You think the Quran is revelation, and therefore that Christians and Jews who believe that the God of Abraham sent these prophets, if they
Yeah.
are consistent, they're going to have to believe that God sent Muhammad, and the most
Yeah.
obvious thing to do is follow him. The Christians come back and say, well, hold on. Since you claim that the same God of Abraham sent you, and that your message agrees with the prophets, well, here are the scriptures that we have in our possession from the prophets. We don't
Yeah.
see you're consistent with them, and that's grounds to reject you as a false prophet. You're now coming back. I want you to hear yourself, and I know you are. You're now coming back and saying, well, see, internally, the Quran says the scriptures are not fully intact. So then you're using the Quran to show which parts are intact, and those parts that contradict the Quran are false, which then leads a Christian to say, exactly, that's what false prophets do. That's what Joseph Smith does. That's what everyone does. When the Bible exposes them as a fraud, see, your Bible's corrupt. Therefore, that's part of the dilemma. That's why we call Islamic dilemma.
This is where Sam delivers the absolute knockout. And I need you to understand why this is so devastating, because it's not just about Islam. It's about recognizing the pattern that all false prophets use when they're caught in a contradiction. Sam lays it out perfectly. He says, here you think the Quran is revelation, and therefore that Christians and Jews who believe that the God of Abraham sent these prophets, if they are consistent, they're going to have to believe that God sent Muhammad. So from the Muslim perspective, if you believe God sent Moses, and you believe God sent Jesus, then consistency demands you believe God sent Muhammad too, right? That's the Islamic claim. Muhammad is in the same line of prophets. But here's where it flips. Christians come back and say, hold on, you're claiming the same God sent you and that your message agrees with the previous prophets. Okay, well, here are the scriptures we have from those prophets, and your message does not agree with them. In fact, it contradicts them on fundamental issues, like who Jesus is, whether he died on the cross, whether he's the Son of God. So that gives us grounds to reject you as a false prophet. And now, listen to what Sam says Khalil is doing in response. He says, internally, the Quran says the scriptures are not fully intact, so then you're using the Quran to show which parts are intact, and those parts that contradict Quran are false. Do you see the circularity? Khalil is using the Quran to determine which parts of the Bible are true and which parts are corrupted. But the only reason he's doing that is because the Quran contradicts the Bible in certain places. So wherever the Bible contradicts the Quran, Khalil says that part of the Bible is corrupt. But wherever the Bible agrees with the Quran, he says that part is preserved. And then comes the most important line in this entire debate. Sam says, which then leads the Christian to say exactly that's what false prophets do. That's what Joseph Smith does. That's what everyone does when the Bible exposes them as a fraud. See, your Bible's corrupt, therefore that's part of the dilemma. That's why we call it Islamic Dilemma. Joseph Smith, Muhammad. Any religious figure who comes along after the Bible and contradicts it, they all use the same playbook. They say the Bible was true, but it got corrupted. Conveniently, it got corrupted in exactly the places where it contradicts them. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The Islamic dilemma isn't just a clever debate trick. It's a fundamental logical problem that exposes the incoherence of the Islamic claim. Either the Quran confirms the scriptures that the Jews and Christians had in the 7th century, in which case Islam is false because those scriptures contradict Islam, or the Quran does not confirm those scriptures, in which case Muhammad's entire argument for why people should believe him falls apart. There's no way out. That's why it's called a dilemma. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.